Today we will be painting the I Love You More painting. Please watch the video entirely before starting the project, then watch while painting along, making sure to pause often. This video is sped up to 2.5 to 4 times the actual rate that I painted. It should take you about an hour. We're going to start off with our flattest, whitest brush, get it wet, and then pick up a decent amount of white and a little bit of the brown. You're going to let your brush strokes mix. I needed a little bit more brown, so I've added some more. Let your brush strokes blend the painting, although we do want some streakies in there. So continuously pick up some white, some brown, and water. We want this background to be nice and thin, and the best way to get a thin layer is to add water often. I gave you guys plenty of paint, but if we don't use enough water, you'll go through the white very quickly. So make sure you're dipping your brush into the water every time you dip into the white paint, and it just a little bit of water. You don't need a lot. If you're using too much, you'll know. So this whole background, we want a nice combination of the white and the tan with some streaks. We're also going to go in and pick up some brown and make some of the streaks a little bit darker. So once I'm satisfied with the entirety of the background, that's when I'm going to go in and find a couple spots where I do just brown. So this is the just brown, very little bit, and I picked up a little bit of white, mostly brown. I'm still adding water, and I'm getting those little streaks a little more. So now I'm going to do the outer edge, which is plain black. You can add a little bit of water to your black. You're going to paint your edges all around. It's okay if it gets it on the front of the canvas because we're going to be blending in some of those edges into the front. So paint the entirety of all the edges. We want the white to be mostly dry before going on to the next point. So once it's dry, pick up a little more black, and you're just going to take tiny little brush strokes, and on the left and right edges, you're just going to go in a little bit, and on the top and bottom, you're going to make a line straight across. That line straight across is going to be comprised of short brush strokes. The more rustic, the better. We're not aiming for perfection. And then we do also go, once we get the edges done and those are dry, we go back in with another very thin coat of white, kind of to mellow everything out. So once we get all of our edges in, we will be doing some black streaks on the front. Now you'll notice once I get to that point, I made my black streaks a bit darker than I'd like. So that is something that I would change if I was doing this differently. So that one's fine, but once I get to these are a little thick. I would make those thinner. So as you're painting along, aim for something a little bit thinner than what I did just here. So I let these dry a bit, and then this is when I went in with some watered down white and tan, and I went in and I made a couple more dark spots, and then I decided to do a nice coat around some of the darker areas, making sure to use tan, white, and water, and I kind of mellowed out some of that dark that I didn't care for. But the best solution for that is just to go thinner in the first place. You can always add more paint, but it's really hard to take away. As you can see, I am trying to remedy right here. So I'm going in with a watered down white and tan, and I'm covering up some of my edges that you can see over on the right and the left. And I'm just trying to do a nice blend of the white going into the black and the black going into the white. Making sure that I add tiny bits of water to my paintbrush every time I go in for white, because this white is opaque, which means it's very thick, and we need water to make sure that it's nice and thin to get the appearance that we want. I do go in with a little bit of black paint using the same brush that we've been using the whole time, which is the wide flat brush. And I do some small lines going in the opposite direction of the background. This just helps the appearance to make it look like a weathered sign. So these right here. Now, the one that I did in the lower right-hand corner, don't do that one. You'll see that I decide to take that out later. So now we're going to trace our stencil that was included in the kit, both the outside and the inside hearts. And we're going to use the big flat brush and we're going to paint it red. I do want to darken this red just a tiny bit. So with red on my brush, I dab the black and there's just the tiniest scotch. It's hard to tell, but that just goes to show how small of amount of black that I'm using. I pick up a little bit more red and then I fill in my heart. This red is opaque enough that we only need one coat, and we're going to move on to the inside, and we're going to use brown, and you can either add white or gold. I added gold. If you use white, use tiny amounts of white until you make it slightly lighter. You will not need very much white at all. I would use a pinhead amount of white to lighten it until you get the desired color. But I added gold. It lightened it a bit and makes it a little shimmery. You have gold with your kit. Now this is actually going to take 2 coats. So you're going to finish the first coat entirely, let it dry completely, and then do a second coat. Once it's dry, we are going to go in with some of the jagged black outline marks. Now I'm still using the big flat brush, but at this point you guys can move down a brush size if you'd like. This is where I decide that I want to move down a brush size. You want to make sure there's water in it. There wasn't quite enough water in it. It didn't paint as smooth, but I added more water. And these lines are very inconsistent. We don't want them to be a complete outline. That's not the theme of this painting. This is very rustic. So do some nice short brush strokes. If your paint goes dry a little bit on your brush, that's fine. And then you just go around the whole heart. And then you're going to go with brush smaller and you're going to do a thin line. Now it's not an outline. It does break in a couple spots and it goes thin. Once again, we don't want perfection. We don't want a solid outline. And then we go in and we do some streaks throughout the heart with the black. Once we're happy with that, we go on to the swirls inside the heart, inside the brown heart. Now, some of these are like a backwards S swirl. Some of these are just curlicue. This is all your personal preference. If you water down your black paint a little bit, it helps it glide on the painting better. So I recommend watering it down until you get an inky consistency. I wouldn't overdo it. I would just do a few. You are going to paint over part of the heart with the words, so this doesn't need to be that busy. So now you're going to go back up a brush size and you're going to water down a little bit of white paint. Now, if it breaks like that, that's enough water. You don't want it to be super solid. And this is when you just barely graze your canvas with your brush with a little bit of white paint. And these marks are all up to you as well. What I like to call willy-nilly. All right. Now we're going to go down a brush size. We're going to water down some black again, and we are going to start writing I love you more. Now, the most important thing here is that you don't write with your paintbrush, you paint the letters. So you're not trying to write with your paintbrush. What you're doing is you're painting the letters. So think of it in brush strokes and not hand strokes as if you're writing. A lot of people don't like the way their handwriting looks when they paint. That's because they're trying to paint their handwriting instead of thinking of each letter and each move as brush strokes. So that I would recommend that here. I would also recommend if you have a black paint pen, then you can write I love you more on the canvas. But if you're going to paint it, I would use a smaller brush. Make sure your black is nice and inky, watered down to an inky consistency, and think of every letter as brush strokes and not as writing. Because technically we are painting this and we're not writing it. Here's where I decided that I needed to cover up this little corner here because I needed more room for the word more. And then I let it dry a little bit, and then I go in with the word more. If you want to pencil your words on, I recommend that, although pencil is hard to erase from dried paint, so there is a risk there. Now you can go back and redo some of the letters, make them a little bit darker, make them a little bit thicker. I recommend doing the letters that overlap the heart thicker so that they're definitely more noticeable. But once you go through and give your letters a second coat if you deem that necessary, then you are all done. Thank you so much for painting with me today. I hope you had a good time.